Hello and good evening, everyone. Um, my name is Sean, and I am joined at the moment by Kim for this historic PlaceCal retrospective and futurespective and presentspective stream. To anyone in the chat, please let me know how close your current temperature is to your desired temperature. I don't need to know either, just is it near or far away currently? And actually, that question goes to Kim as well.
I think I am like middling. I can't think of a word that means somewhere between a little bit and medium. I'm kind of in that range.
You're a medium distance away from your desired temperature with your current temperature.
But a bit less than medium. I actually quite like it warm, but not this warm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard because temperature, it's one of those scales, isn't it? Where like when you go up, you go up a degree, it's not like it doesn't relate. It's not like a doubling in temperature. If you double, it's a bit strange.
Oh, are we on heating up bathtubs of water, energy expenditure stuff?
Yeah. I can't remember. There's a name for the scale when it's not linear, isn't it? Because it's like, what actually is 1 degree? I think it's quite hard to say what 1 degree is or 5 degrees.
Okay, well, I'd intended this as just a little bit of light small talk for the heat, but no, I don't want to talk logarithmic scales at this point in the stream. I just want to say hello to everyone. Welcome to the stream. Please welcome us to our own stream. Is anyone already familiar with PlaceCal? Is anyone here from Geeks For Social Change that has any awareness of PlaceCal? Let us know in the chat. Or even write in words like just hello. That's also nice. Kim, would you like to let people know what we are doing this evening and what the purpose of this stream is?
Yeah. So I suppose there's a number of ways this could say. So PlaceCal is a project that I've been working on for a long time now and we'll sort of get into the history of it, but it's sort of touched on everything that Geeks For Social Change has done in terms of it's gone into community development, it's gone into software, it's gone into activism, it's gone into institutions, it's even involved Manchester City Council. And I think there's so much learning from it, but because it's been such a hands-on, on-the-ground project that's sort of a little bit jumped from funding bid to funding bid, project to project, I think it's, we've sort of been, we've tried various avenues with it, like social enterprise, research, as an activist thing. And as a result, it's now kind of quite a mess and hard to explain. I think it's also been very hard to get everyone who has worked on it in the same place. So that's kind of what this stream's about, really. So our guests will introduce themselves in a bit, but we've kind of selected people who've been quite crucial to the various stages of PlaceCal's development. And they'll talk a little bit about what their involvement was too. And I think this is where I always go a little bit off the rails. Now I have to pull me back, Sean, because almost the most interesting thing we've learned about it is why it's so hard to set up digital commons. So another example of a digital commons might be Wikipedia, for example. And it's funny, if you go in the tech world, everyone's talking about making the next Uber or the next ChatGPT, but no one's really like, how are we making the next Wikipedia? And I think that's kind of where we're at with this. It turns out it's actually really hard to launch a thing off the ground that requires people to think in that way, where I think, Wikipedia now makes so much sense. But can you imagine being the person working on that when they were in like the first 10 pages? Everyone would think you were mad. So I think that's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to work out this mad phase,
That's good, because the shorthand, I'm not an expert on PlaceCal, but the shorthand I've always had in my head is that it's a Wikipedia for events, which to me is enthralling and exciting. Because once a Wikipedia exists, the private sector can't really touch it. No one can come and make a paid encyclopedia now. It couldn't possibly be as good, and you couldn't charge or put adverts in it because Wikipedia already exists.
I think, we did a podcast a long time ago about Facebook events, actually. And it's funny how many people, back when Facebook was still good, so many people make careers on Facebook events because fundamentally you could write an event, publish it, and have your friends know about it without giving anyone money. And it would show up in people's feed in a linear order, and they'd be able to say they're going, and then your other friends would see they were going to it. And I think none of these things are true anymore. I think now if you're using Facebook events, you are in a world of video marketing and other horrors. And actually, it's been this institutification process that I think Cory Doctorow has explained very well. So yeah, exactly like you say, I think, taking on these giant billionaire tech platforms is almost impossible, but maybe we can just try and take one piece of data, in our case, events and information about community groups, and make it so for just that one thing, you don't need to go on Facebook.
Yeah, my interest in it comes from, I've got a lot of experience in the struggles of live events and promoting, and I started trying to get people to come to live events in 2010, 2011, and it was the golden age of Facebook spam. You could spam anyone. You could put everyone you've ever met, add them all on Facebook, and then go, I'm doing a thing down the road. And that was it. That was all you really had to do, because the amount of people that would therefore see it. I mean, you were spamming and no one was stopping you. It's a golden era for me. I'm sure it wasn't a golden era for all the people who had to hear about everything I was putting on. But there's no equivalent now. It's a bit fractured and fragmented, and something about the video economy means that people need to be micro-influencers and celebrities in their own right just to get people in a room for a live event.
Right. This is a definite shift I remember happening. I used to find out about events through a site called Indie Media, which was kind of it's still active in some countries. It just kind of broke down here a little bit, but it was just an activist events calendar. And I think it's how I ended up moving to Leeds. I just saw there was stuff going on there that sounded like stuff I was going to be involved in. So I just went. But like you say, it was back in a time where I think we were mostly posting like things like that to the internet, either relatively anonymously or you were just a screen name, right? Like you were just a name, and it wasn't like linked to your entire personality. But now it feels impossible to post anything online that isn't somehow linked to a digital edifice of your entire person forever. And if you don't do that, then no one's going to see it.
Yeah. And so something could exist that was more Wikipedia-ish. I don't know what the essential qualities of that are, but I feel like everyone would flock to it. But presumably, I mean, Wikipedia struggles to maintain itself.
I've actually heard that's not true, and apparently they have enormous cash reserves and keep pretending they don't. But
Really,
so.
I've spent the last half a decade being like, oh my god, they're on death's door. Oh, this could be the end. This could be the end of knowledge. This could be the end of everything. Imagine what would happen if Wikipedia went down. We'd go back to the Stone Age.
I know. I mean, every university would have to close down, right?
Yeah. I can't go through the day without going, what's that? And then looking that up on Wikipedia. I learned what abalone was yesterday. I don't think I could have done that without Wikipedia.
I only found out what abalone was because I found a tin of fake abalone in a Chinese grocer's. And I was like, what's that? I don't think I ever ate it, actually. I was too scared.
You found fake abalone? What would it have been like?
Fake abalone.
Soy abalone?
Mm-hmm.
Soy snail?
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't get it?
Oh, no, I did get it.
Oh, thank God.
I just didn't eat it.
Do you have it in the house?
No, I gave it to someone. It was a gift. It was a gift.
What were the circumstances under which you can socially give someone soy abalone?
I mean, you know what vegans are like. They love that shit.
Did they love it?
I don't know if they ever tried it.
Right, but they liked receiving it. Their
yes,
face lit up at that moment.
The concept, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's not just going to be me and you. Well, let's see if that works, because if our guest can hear me, and your webcam and microphone is intentionally disabled, now would be a great time to re-enable it.
Cool.
There we go. It worked. Summoned. Then I would like to welcome to the stream Stefan White.
Hello. I didn't expect to segue into a conversation about abalone, abalone, as you pronounce it. But there you go.
Oh,
are you an abalone fan?
That's the thing about Wikipedia. It only gives you the pronunciation and IPA unless you're really good on that.
Yeah, well, now you don't get sent to Wikipedia, do you? You get an AI summary at the top of the page, so you don't actually look at even any of the searches that the advertisers have paid for you to see. So, it's fantastic.
It summarizes an obvious joke from 2007.
Thank you for the raid, a good Pete. We're being raided by a good Pete. Thank you. Hey.
Oh, there's people online. Well, there you go.
Yeah, there's people online. What can you do? Can't stop them. Can't stop them. Can't risk encouraging them. I will enable the feeds for our other guests, and when they choose to reappear, then they will appear. Hello. Welcome, Rakesh. And welcome, Jay. This is everyone. Kim, what do you think makes the most sense? Should people go around and introduce themselves?
Yeah, let's do a little intro, and then we'll go from there. I think everyone knows me. I'm Kim. It's Geeks For Social Change. I think if you don't know me, I'd love to know in chat how that's true. So yeah.
If any raiders don't know Kim, please explain.
Notoriety, I think that's called, isn't it? No, not something I'm ever going to achieve. But I'm Stefan White, so I'm an architect, and I teach architecture at the Manchester School of Architecture. But over the last 17 years or so, I've been doing research around how communities make places, and working in particular with older people around age-friendly cities. And that's how this story started for me, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
Shall I go next?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jay Stewart, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm from Gendered Intelligence, so I met Kim. I don't actually know how our paths actually crossed, but we fortuitously did, and I got introduced to PlaceCal as a concept, and Kim and I went on to cook up a project called Trans Dimension, so working with sort of the trans community really, which is quite a fragmented and spread out and embryonic community, I think, in terms of people coming together and feeling that sense of belonging, I suppose, what communities are supposed to do, that kind of coming together. So I'll talk more about that as well as time goes on. Thanks for having me.
And Rakesh?
Yep. Hello, everyone. My name's Rakesh. I work for an organisation called Tipping Point UK. We are a small organisation that organises on environmental stuff, but we mainly kind of go into the intersections and deal with the stuff that the bigger orgs don't deal with. My part in the story is more about, I was just passionate about having something that could bring communities together in the region that I was working in, and also have ideas about what I want to do in the future with it.
Right. Well, to tell the story of PlaceCal, let's try and begin at the beginning. Stefan, this project has its roots with you, is that right? What led to PlaceCal existing? What were the early days of the project, and what problems was it trying to solve?
This is going to be interesting to see if my brain has retained any of the answers to those questions, because it started quite a while ago now. I think for me, its origins are in basically my time at the architecture school. I was very keen to make the connections outside of the school and outside of the discipline for a bunch of reasons that were to do with my own research. And so the kind of motivation was always to try and engage more directly with communities of place where they might be affected by development, and connect those people with people who had the power to create development and affect their lives. So I was always trying to connect those things together. And there's a long tradition in architecture and planning about participation and making sure people are involved in decisions about their environments. But it kind of stopped around 1979, and I don't know why. And then it hasn't been so popular for quite some time since. So I suppose it was kind of trying to reinvigorate some of those principles where local people should have a say about their homes and neighborhoods. But the project for me was prompted in relation to my research. I saw a project in Cornwall, in Redroof in Cornwall, called the Beacon Project, and it was around 1996. And essentially, the poorest, these stats are always kind of weird kind of boasts about negative things, but the poorest community in Europe at the time, and this estate in Redroof had the worst health outcomes you can possibly imagine, and they were kind of ridiculous. 90% of the children on the estate were on the risk register, and no one had a GCSE since they were, since they started, and essentially it was a no-go area for the police. And a local health visitor called Hazel Stootley, who's now OBE, went into the estate, and she started talking to the residents and saying, hey, this is just horrible. You don't want to live here, do you? And everyone agreed. And she managed to get them to kind of call a meeting and get people to start working together. But because of, she's an incredibly driven person, engaging person, she also then got the local police officer involved and the local council, and essentially they created a partnership between the residents and between all the stakeholders that were avoiding having any involvement with this estate because it was so terrible. She got them all together in a partnership, and then the local residents decided how to spend the money that was allocated for the refurbishment of their horrific flats and damp and horrendous buildings that they were living in. And so they allocated the money. They decided whose houses got refurbished first. They took control of the whole process, and they formed a partnership that lasted about 25 years that just transformed the estate in the period of like 2 or 3 years to having no antisocial behaviour, winning Cornwall local flower awards for the gardens, and it was just for me, it stood out as this example where relationships have the power. The power in relationships is transformative, and they had running water, they had houses, they had a state system that could provide education and could provide healthcare, and with the right relations, with the right people connected in the right way, where they were willing to listen to each other and share power, then the results were able to be completely changed. So a few years later, working in Manchester, just trying to connect, really, as I say, connect with the city and connect with people working in the city, I connected with Paul McGarry, who was running the ageing strategy for Manchester City Council. And so we started working together on how we could make the city more inclusive for older people, because age discrimination was a kind of hidden issue, I suppose, at the time. People still find it sometimes a little difficult to imagine that age discrimination is going on. And so I started to try and apply those principles that I'd seen in the Beacon Project to neighbourhood planning interventions. And we took the World Health Organization Age-Friendly Cities and Communities guidance, which was trying to suggest all the things that you need in a neighbourhood for it to be a nice place. But but what we did with that was we kind of took that as a guide, but we said, well, how can you actually achieve that in a place? What happens if you apply that to a place and you actually try and do that? And we did that in Old Moat in South Manchester, or we tried to do it. And we got hundreds of older people involved, and we created a plan together with them and a bunch of local stakeholders about what to do, which was kind of managed by the housing provider in the area. And they're still kind of involved today, and there were hundreds of actions that came out of the action plan, and they, ranging from a kind of new housing development, age restricted housing development and community spaces, collaboration between existing specialist housing providers so that they kind of shared their communal rooms and their activity resources, down to like the smallest intervention was that there was a local, they called it a travel club, but it was, I suppose, the most mobile older person in the group would go knock onto the next most mobile person's house, and then they would form a kind of walking train to the local park where they were just looking out for each other. And so it was this range of different interventions from, there was a campaign to kind of change one of the street crossings. There were some benches put in up to the scale of a housing development. And so they were impacting on the strategy for all these different aspects of our neighbourhood. So from housing, transport, social care provision, there was connections with the school. The Sure Start Centre started doing activities for older people instead of just for younger people, because no one had ever thought, well, actually the Sure Start Centre doesn't have to just do events for younger people, though that's its main reason. So essentially it's a kind of social program, social and environmental program that is about collaboration. So whilst I'm an architect, a lot of my investment is around improving the actual place infrastructure, the environment. The biggest transformative power is in the relationships between the stakeholders and enabling people to have power over the decisions in their area. And that's also what all of the evidence shows is what gives you the best kind of improvement in your health outcomes, is being connected to groups, feeling like you belong, feeling like the things that you do have value and meaning, not just for you, but for others. And so those are the most transformative things for health. And they're also the things that enable you to make changes to your neighbourhood. Because an example from our most recent project, and then I'll make the connection to PlaceCal, but an example from our most recent project, for example, is that the local authority representatives would normally go and talk to the highways department, for example, about how a street crossing is not good enough. And the highways would say, look, we've got a schedule for all of our accessibility, and that'll be done in 2035. But in this case, because they're working in partnership, one of the older residents who happens to use a wheelchair went with the local authority representative and other residents, and they did a walkability assessment of the area, walkability and wheelability assessment of the area, and they showed that they couldn't get to the health centre. And because the local authority representative went to the highways team with a disabled older person who was explaining why it was difficult, they just looked at their schedule of works and reordered their priorities. So it didn't even cost anyone any money. But they also took down a note of all of the other things that need to be done and put them on the schedule in order of priority. So it's that kind of collaborative adjustment of power relations and the silos between different stakeholders and systems, and that that's really true across medical treatment and services and all of the kind of public house work in the neighbourhood. And it's hopefully, maybe it seems to have become a really big issue nationally. So in Greater Manchester, there's a move towards a more place-based approach to public services. It's called Live Well, the programme. And we're trying to support the kind of Live Well in later life offer and how that gets seen and thought through. but we just heard nationally that, you know, West Streeting is moving the NHS towards a more place-based approach to delivery of services. And I think partly that's a reflection on austerity, because when you've got no money and you know demand is going to grow, then you want to find alternative solutions. But it's also, I think, a recognition of that this is the, you know, where you live is where you experience your happiness and joy and the challenges and difficulties you face. You did ask the question, but so the connection to PlaceCal is that in the first neighbourhood we did on our second project, we were trying to be as inclusive as we possibly could. So we were trying to co-produce the program with all of the residents in the neighbourhood, and we did really extensive engagement. And the first thing we did as part of a transformative community development or asset-based approach was to try and speak to everybody who already lived in the neighbourhood or ran an activity in the neighbourhood or managed a venue. And so quite deliberately, we kind of tried to understand what the relationships were, because we knew the relationships were transformative. So we created a calendar, and it was a manual Google calendar of everything we could find out, every activity that was on. And then when we went to a community event, we printed it out at the, you know, big, massive poster size and got people to fill in. And it was great because people loved to tell us how wrong we were and what we were missing. And so it got really great engagement. And we ended up having this you know, this massive calendar was just so full of stuff. And then we started, you know, the partnership started putting on activities, and we were able to kind of coordinate them and realize, well, actually, you're going to put on a luncheon club. We'd love to fund a luncheon club, but there are already 2 on a Wednesday. So maybe we could put one on a Saturday, and it turned into Saturday Soup Kitchen. So there was, you know, there was already immediate benefit to all the participants. But then we also realized that suddenly, because the partnership had done this, we all knew about the events. And then it didn't, you know, my tech awareness is moderate. Well, it's declining rapidly as I lose more and more interest in the enshittification of everything. But it was quite high when I started the project, and I saw the potential for connecting all these venues together, and maybe digitally, and so that we could maybe make a permanent solution to this. You know, the benefits that we were finding by understanding what was going on in the area. And I think one of the key things about what we were finding was that none of this information would have been shared otherwise. It was peer-to-peer, or it was, you know, word of mouth stuff. And suddenly, just by the partnership knowing, the events were getting greater attendance. They were, you know, they were spread out better. So you, as a user of those events, you had more spread out over the week. People knew each other more and things like that. And so the partnership and the work we were doing as supporting the partnership, which was resident led, just had this incredible knowledge about the area and was able to share it with people and connect people together. And then realizing this, we thought that there should be a way of trying to make this kind of manifest somehow. And I searched around for a long time for someone who could help do this. And finding, you know, I tried all the university departments and working with students and, you know, enterprise departments and things that had these tech skills. But finding someone who knew why it was important to work with the community and wasn't just trying to do something clever with code was a very different conversation to have. And when I was introduced to Kim, we immediately were on the same page. And so that's then when the kind of second part of the story started, and we managed to get some funding as part of a very large Manchester project called City Verve to do a first version of what I can't remember how we came up with the name, but it was a place calendar, and it was really solidly attempting initially, at least, to replicate what we'd done manually. And I think as we went on, we kind of realised that there were other aspects to that. But I'll let someone else narrate that.
Yeah, and I think when we met, I think that was exactly it, because I've done websites for a long time, and the longer you do it, the more you find people don't really need these big complicated things. We just have to pay attention to all the tiny things. And I think that's the shared thing in our approach that appealed to me so much about the Maffin project. It was just this attention to the little things that you're never going to get funding for them because they're too tiny most of the time. But it's the things that usually communities are screaming at you to try and fix. Like, it can even be silly stuff like, can someone just fix this tap, please? Or like, I think the big example we were dining out on for a while was the one where it was, you found that area where there was huge health inequalities, and it just turned out there was no disabled toilet anywhere in the area. And there was a community building that was a church. They're not in the business of building disabled toilets. The NHS definitely don't build disabled toilets. It ended up being a couple grand, and they fit a toilet, and now everyone can use that building, and it's just available to the community. But it's just, it's something out of reach individually, but through this sense of relation that Stefan's talking about, it worked. And I think the other place that I found our skill sets really complementary when we were first introduced was, like a lot of my background is doing grassroots on the ground, more kind of anarchist, communist, queer kind of organizing, where you just sort of never expect to ever have any power. And I think you were the first person I'd met who had the radical idea that you could use those same methods, but actually involve people who do have power. And I think obviously the reason why this group, I think it goes both ways. Like, we found the institutions can be incredibly hostile to work with, and perhaps they should work better. So I think we had this real, I had a real bottom up experience, and you had this kind of more experience of the strategic level and the kind of top down, although they both contain the other. And I think that's where a lot of the project came from. But yeah, like you said, when we met, all everyone cared about was Internet of Things. That was the buzzword back then.
Well, that was
it's like, if it doesn't have a chip in it, I don't care.
Probably not be too rude about it. It did give us quite a bit of funding. Yeah, I think there's a really, I haven't really thought it through for quite a long time. I'm sure we talked about it at the time, but the key thing about the kind of the Beacon project in Cornwall was that it changed the power relationships. So if you want to transform a situation, you can't do it if your relationships are the same, because the relationships are the situation. But if you can somehow have a different set of relationships or change the nature of those relationships, then your capacity does literally change. And that was that's a kind of theoretical background to it, is through the capability model of a human rights model from Martha Sen and Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum and that kind of thing. And it's this idea that your capabilities are restricted by the relations that you're in. So it's like maybe an extension of the disability model, the social model of disability. But then, we kind of just took it literally, and it's like, well, if you know a different set of people and they know different things and have different jobs, and then maybe what you can do about the challenges they're facing is different. And I do think that's true, but I think there's underlying thing that sometimes gets missed by community development is there are structural issues as well, where it's very difficult to change some of those significant things, the facts of your birth and what the government policy is and things like that. But so what was really crucial in the Beacon project was that those kind of local structural issues were challenged by bringing in the police, for example, who had been adversarial previously, but they were now acting as peers. And there's it's a really long running project now called the TR14s, where the police run a dance troupe with local teens in Cornwall, and it grew out of that project, and it's been going on. And what happens now is that it's generational, that the graduates of the previous set of the troupe you kind of now go in and teach the next set, so these things can then embed as well. And I think the key kind of I suppose evidence that the partnerships were real and meaningful was that a lot of them sustained for a long time after we did our parachuting research project, so that they were resident led and they had real meaning for the people that were there, and they went on. Not all of them in all cases, but we tried then from that to understand what enabled the success. So we're kind of doing similar projects now across Greater Manchester, but trying to embed in those processes within kind of more bureaucratic scenarios for delivery of healthcare, within the bigger organizations.
So just to swerve it back to PlaceCal a little, so the nuts and bolts of the project on the ground were basically, we already had all these relationships in place because of amazing community development worker called Matt. So, they kind of knew the 30 organizations, and it's the neighborhood I lived in. So we basically just went around door stopping people and were like, look, can we give you a bit of IT support to get your tech up and running? Just to publish. We were basically saying publish in any format. At the time, it was very heavily, Office 365, Google Calendar, stuff like that. And we'll help you. In fact, and we're going to come around. And it was amazing how many of these barriers you found where it was like, oh, we've got a computer, but it's not plugged in. Or, oh, we could do it from this room, but it doesn't have internet. Or, oh, we've got IT support, but they're on phone from Oxford or the other things. And we had to kind of be quite single-minded to just like knock down these barriers that often weren't very big. It was just, death by admin type stuff. And in the end, we had about 30 organizations listed. This is our original pilot. I think they had about 16 calendars, which was adding up to something like 250 events a week in Hume, which is an area of about 10,000 people, I think. It was absolutely
smaller than that. Yeah.
It was just like there was so much happening, and it really blew everyone's mind. And it was just through this methodical thing of let's digitally include everyone and then support them to be part of this network. And I think, and then sort of the wall we hit, which is probably where we start segueing to the next part of the story, is we were like, great, we fixed it, we've cracked it. This is before me and Steph knew quite how autistic we were too. Sorry to out you, Steph. We were like, great, won't everyone be really happy that we've solved this really gnarly social problem everyone's been telling us is a problem for the last 5 years with some cool tech that they're already using? Surely someone will want to fund this. And of course, talking about relations, we found that I think maybe is chicken egg, right? Part of the reason why we couldn't get it funded is because no one actually wants to fund this relational work. So we kind of hit a brick wall, and then we were stuck in about 2020. And what we had was a really good platform to help older people meet each other in real life. And that was surprisingly not going down very well.
Yeah.
So I think we had a little break. And then I think we now sort of enter the next part of the story, which is, chatting to Jay. So I don't know if you want to take over at this point, Jay, or if you've got anything to add, Sean. Sorry, I've taken over hosting duties, I feel like.
Oh, no, that's absolutely fine. Well, I have a question I want to ask. I think it's going to be a complicated one, but I'm interested in Kim and Stefan. The fact that there's such a gap that a service needs to be made to aggregate events and what's going on in people's locale in place of word of mouth, whatever would have traditionally existed, notice board, local bulletins. Why is there such a gap? Is it like austerity, lack of community spaces? Is it like search engines being bad? Why does PlaceCal need to come in and exist to fill this social?
You've probably got. I think you listed probably quite a few of the causes, and I think they're all kind of common. I think we were specifically looking at marginalized groups, from in this perspective, older people, but in a neighborhood where it was challenging for them because it's the youngest neighborhood in Manchester, Hume. So there was kind of some specific challenges, but also a lot of the older people in a particular area were the most, the poorest, oldest, least mobile, which was deliberately a focus of these programs, because I think the answer to your question is in a neighborhood where people are not suffering the structural determinants or structural exclusion so badly. They do have a residents group that creates a little newsletter, and they do, maybe there are a few retired people that have the time to go around and join the dots and connect people up, and there is a T group, and I think the challenge is slightly different in terms of like the community looking out for itself. I think that from the city council service point of view, there had previously been a neighbourhood officer who made a monthly newsletter that had everything on it. It was really good. Apparently, he knew everything that was going on. And so he'd had this enduring relationship with the neighbourhood. and then with quite specifically the austerity cuts under the Cameron government absolutely scuppered that process that was going on, and that newsletter specifically stopped. So that was definitely something that happened, of course. But then I think also alongside that, people started to depend. I think you talked about it right at the beginning. People started to depend on the fact the internet was going to solve all of this just kind of naturally, and that you posted something on Facebook and everyone turned up, and there was just this imagination for a short while that everyone was already connected if they had the internet in their house, and there's still a vestige of that with this digital inclusion nonsense, I would call it, that just by virtue of like having your mobile phone or something, then suddenly you've got everything at your fingertips. And I think that kind of was true maybe for a little bit, or for certain groups it was, and I think that didn't help this situation. But in terms of notice boards, the projects we're doing now, one of the things that gets done is a notice board. One of the things that's been done instead of PlaceCal, because they're not doing PlaceCal yet in the areas we're working right now, is a newsletter that the partnership are creating of all the local events, because we got them to do the manual calendar in these new neighbourhoods we're working in, and working up to see how we can move that forward. Yeah, so those things are all being put in place. But from a tech point of view, I'm sure Kim would add more.
Yeah, I think that's just it. I think I'll move on to Jay, so I'll try and keep it brief. But something that's really come into focus the last few years is, I think everyone's so used to tech being a product. So a thing you'll solve that fixes a problem, like if you got bad skin, just get this face cream, right? And our lives now, I think everyone now has this sense of just this creep of the hundreds and hundreds of apps we use every day. But our lives don't seem to be getting any easier. We're not any better off. We don't have any more free time. And I think this is kind of what happened. So I saw an email today that, the city council is now just pushing AI on all the staff, and I think they're going to use it for benefit claims and things like this. And it's like, does anyone really think that this is going to make things easier? And I think basically what our approach was all about was just, we're not trying to sell a product. We're just saying you should have a single canonical event source that can be human or computer read for each organization or what you're doing. And this has been the thing that we've still not managed to get across, really. I think it's just not a thing people can really understand, because they're so used to thinking about, I use Facebook, I use Meetup, I use this, but it's like, but what does it do? So I think this has been the challenge for a lot of us. And someone described to us during the field work that community information is a kind of folklore. You'll maybe hear a rumor there was a yoga class somewhere a while ago, and maybe you can find the teacher if you track them down. And I think that's how it is most of the time still. But even now, it doesn't have to be like that, right? So anyway, shall we move on and hear a little bit from Jay? Because yeah.
Shall I just sort of dive in? Yeah, this is such a fascinating context to sort of where I kind of came in, really. So I founded an organisation called Gendered Intelligence, and we work with the trans community. We're a lived experience organisation, so by and for. And, I started out doing kind of trans community work, writing newsletters actually for a trans mask organisation in London in the early 2000s it would have been. And it was kind of been going from strength to strength, really, sort of specialising mostly in youth work, so bringing young people into group settings. So in terms of like events, we were very much around regular group activities, doing kind of youth work practice, really, bringing young people together so that it could form a sense of connectivity and a sense of community belonging. And people would travel really far to come on a Saturday afternoon to hang out with other trans youth, and then turn around and go back home on the sleeper train sometime. It was like, it's really quite wild. And as we were fighting against the austerity cuts, but we were seemingly also appealing for certain funders, because as we sort of established ourselves as a sort of a trans-led organisation, there was an appetite from funders, from trusts and foundations to support the community work. one of the challenges is sort of how do you grow? How do you kind of meet the need across the regions and thinking geographically around that kind of stuff as well. And I suppose what we kind of got to a point around was that we didn't necessarily like want to grow anymore, and we were kind of curious about mapping like who else is doing this stuff, like where are the youth groups, where is the trans kind of community activity. And it was a bit like herding cats, really. You kind of like would kind of get sight of, like you say, the yoga class on a Saturday morning for trans folk, and then you're like, oh, I'll rock up, and then by the time you rock up, it's closed or something, or it's dropped off, because it's also grassrootsy. It's also sort of volunteer kind of run. There was never a way to keep a handle on the events, what's going on. So. So I suppose one of the things the other thing probably to say about trans people is that the sense of local community is really not the same for trans folk. You know, there are hardly any trans people. You know, usually people want to hang out with trans people and they have to kind of venture afar and be reasonably organised at, and you become, I think they call it a community of interest, don't they? So sort of set of people who are kind of somehow collecting over a particular kind of identity or experience, rather than this idea of kind of local. And the conversations Kim and I were having early days were like, how do you get kind of trans visibility going at a local level? Like, how can we support trans activity in, you know, kind of Croydon and, you know, Birmingham and like suburbs around these places, and sometimes in quite rural areas. And so I suppose going back to the kind of newsletter things, that our tagline, that I know that I don't think I came up with it, but I kind of latched onto, is this idea of being like the kind of digital time out for trans folks. So back in the day when I was going out on the queer scene in London, it was all about having time out, you know, like when they've got like LGBT sections and you could always kind of see what's listed. It was quite reliable, and people were reasonably organised around that stuff. So the idea was to sort of find some what we call digital partners. So trans folk trying to organise their yoga activities in sort of South Croydon on a Saturday, join the partnership that became known as the Trans Dimension. And so then we could then advertise their wares through that. And that's kind of how it rolled, really. It was quite reasonably straightforward because you got the model here, you kind of got the idea set up. And I suppose from my side of things, that the tech that was useful was around not having to keep it updated, that the information was always going to be up to date and accurate. And I think that's the massive appeal. So I feel like it's still got kind of legs really in our community and across the wider LGBT community, to be able to be that reliable source of information for, like, you know, when things start and then when things stop again, it's all kind of there and present and correct. So that's the massive appeal for us. And I think we kind of got hold of this idea because there was a funding opportunity from Comet Relief. And the funding pot was called Tech for Social Good. So it was completely like ticking all our boxes in terms of what we were trying to achieve. So I think this idea of using tech for social good is reasonably early days with sort of funders that I come across anyway in terms of trusts and foundations. But certainly it is about how do you get this kind of not get sucked into this kind of digital world where actually you're feeling more isolated and less authentic as a person and less probably safe, actually, you know, in digital spaces. How can we encourage connectivity and in-person time, but also draw on the world of tech and digital spaces to do that? And I think that kind of both and approach needs to be part of the solution, really. So I've just had a look on the website, actually. There's loads of partners. We went from London. Kim, I don't know whether you want to say a little bit more because you kind of picked it up and used it in Manchester, and there is real appetite to do this. So basically we say, if there's no excuse for isolation now if you're a trans person, because this is the idea that all trans people are reasonably isolated, which is kind of fair enough because you usually are the only trans in the village. But with this kind of access to that information, and the fact that people are doing their thing, they are putting on events, they are trying to make things happen, just small groups of people kind of like doing an activity and being kind of trans-only or trans kind of like specific, but also maybe trans-inclusive as well. And, these things are available. We just got to kind of know about them really and trying to make that bridge that space through the digital platform. So I think that's probably all that I can say about it really. I don't know if you want me to expand.
I'm just
any
glad
more,
you said
Kim,
it was straightforward. It didn't feel straightforward to me. So that's
no,
good.
It wasn't.
Like that's
the concept is straightforward though, isn't it?
I think the big stat we got on that one, just picking up on what you said at the start, was we did a poll on Twitter of people who follow Gendered Intelligence, and one of the questions was how many trans groups you know of in London, and the median was 3, which was shocking. It's like, how online do you have to be to follow GI on Twitter to start with? And then I think after we'd finished our pilot, basically we went through what was already there. So we passed all the existing out-of-date listings and all the rest of it, and we ended up with about 50 groups. We had a really nice launch party. There's some photographs of it around. And I think it's just that sense of network. And I think for me, this is kind of where the project's at now. We sort of built this network and we're now trying to realize it a bit, because I think community organizers, we've all done it. You can get a bit territorial, of like, oh no, we're the yoga group. Why is there another yoga group? What's this? What's the other? I can see Rakesh nodding. We'll bring him in a sec. And I think like the first step, and everything with Geeks for Social Change I've done is felt a bit like this. Your first step is to kind of be a bit like, okay, it's great. There's 7 other tech studios doing social change stuff, but they are my competition business wise. And it's hard to take a step back and go, okay, no, actually we're all working on the same problem. We're kept apart because of the way capitalism works, but actually there's way more potential if we work together than if we're just like, oh no, that's the bad community center, this is the good community center. You know what I mean? That was a bit of a ramble, but yeah. And then basically once we set up all the tech, we were able to roll out in Manchester, and we're figuring out funding for that now. It's all been so sporadic. I think every nonprofit I know of has just, all their funding fell off a cliff in 2024, and we're picking up the pieces now. So it's a difficult time to run a project not for the most gross profits imaginable, for the worst people in the world.
So the first PlaceCal with Gendered Intelligence covered all trans events in London. Was that the scope of it? How easy was it for you to deal with like a region of such size and density? And how able were you to perceive or anyway like measure what the outcomes of setting this thing up were? Do you know, are you aware of the degree to which this changed things for people? That's a good
question, actually, because I think that's the the analytics. I think is something to continue to look into, because you kind of you don't know what people are looking at and then going off and kind of like rocking up to a thing, and there wasn't necessarily a comprehensive through line of kind of where they found their information and then getting kind of their foot through the door sort of thing. But I think for me, if we can demonstrate impact, that's where you've got scalability for funding. So I think there are still there's still work to do here. I would say also the advertising of the trans dimension itself is probably still not where it needs to be. Like, probably more people need to know that it exists and to think, oh, I'll check out trans dimension at the weekend, see what's occurring. So it still it's a little bit like this. I don't know. This is my experience as well. Like, you kind of pick a project, deliver on it. It's fantastic. You have a launch party, but there is still then a kind of go again, isn't there? We've got to kind of go again with efforts to get the message out there and get it kind of utilized. So I don't know how you feel, Kim, but I'm still a little bit kind of in that space.
Yeah. I think it's funny because, in a sane economy, it just feels like a clear public good for the reasons we were saying, right? Like, I'm sure, what's the social impact of a Wikipedia page? It's such a silly question to me. It's just like if people, you know, if we're saying having social networks is good, then people can't find out about things they don't know about. And in fact, I think this is probably the thing I've not said yet, especially in the Hume pilot, less so in others. 95% of the events we were talking about weren't published anywhere till we came across and supported them. There was just no way to know about them. And it's just even that step is something we've really struggled with funders on, because they always want these very like tech sector metrics, like how many visitors or this. And to be honest, we get quite a lot. The site requires basically no maintenance and gets about 1,000 visitors a month. So it's definitely not nothing. And I think, especially when you consider what's the trans population of London and Manchester, I think 1,000's probably not bad. But it is weird because we're specifically, and all the tech for good people struggled with this. The IoT people definitely did. Just the idea that we want a service that you don't log into, you use anonymously, we never know you've used it. People find it quite challenging, actually. Like step one of almost every tech tutorial is a login, right?
I think in terms of speak to the impact question a little bit. Kim was touching on it there, but obviously we're connecting groups together, and the groups actually have numbers of people in them, and so the numbers of groups that are clicked together and the visits to the site don't show the number of people that are actually being connected and are using the services and are taking part in the activities and ending up at the after parties and things. And that's pretty difficult to capture in this kind of remote sense. When we were working in a community of place, you know, we had the evidence. We could go and, I mean, that's still very difficult, but we could go, well, look, you know, that, you know, there are 20 elders every Saturday that go to the Saturday soup kitchen who didn't have a Saturday meal previously, and you can say that, but obviously without getting some kind of feedback from each of the groups on the trans dimension and some testimonies from individuals and doing that kind of evaluation, it's kind of tricky to make the case. One of the things that we were thinking about, you know, was that this kind of network effect, where that if there were 3, you could find 3 groups, and now you can find 53, and each of those groups on average has 10 people, and they meet every 2 weeks. You know, there's this kind of burgeoning emergent network effect that suggests a lot of people involved. But then there's the qualitative bit of it, which is if you take, say, older people or trans people who might be the most marginalized group, you know, very, very marginalized groups in different ways, very distinct ways, and you show that you can, this kind of calendar application supports them, then it should work for everyone else, right? Who's already more connected.
This is probably actually a really good segue into Rakesh, who's been very patient, because I think Rakesh's situation was different to everyone else's too, in that you were based in the Northeast, where actually everything was, you're both dealing with an interest and people being way further apart than we dealt with before. So, I mean, that's not what you have to talk about, but I just thought it might be good to talk about Tipping Point and what it's like for you trying to join all this climate justice up, but from a community level rather than a, you know, more XR kind of agitprop kind of way.
Yeah, so like I can start from my very beginning of organizing within a climate space. You know, I set up the Greenpeace group in Newcastle. It's still going, so I'm always happy when I hear that it still exists and stuff like that. But already when I started doing that work, I was trying to do this thing of trying to create a calendar. I was using Greenpeace's really old website to kind of post the events, whoever was doing events. I didn't really care who the people were, like Labour people or people doing migrant justice and stuff like that, because I've always had the sense that like all of these things, that environmental and social justice stuff, many of the people who are doing the work have similar kind of standpoints. And if we can find ways to bring people together and to support each other, then we have a better chance in winning the things that we want to win. So yeah, and so I started doing that. One of the first things I did within that volunteering role was to go to every organization that I knew or that I found out about and say, look, I want to do this thing. can you share your information with me? So that worked for a while, and then Greenpeace decided that they would like to have that thing of having a website where you have to sign on to, and it's like, and then if you don't sign on to it, you don't have access to the things. And so that kind of pushed that away, and that didn't happen anymore. And then fast forward to me working for Tipping Point. So like I said, we're a climate organization, but we work within the intersections, you know, and try and support the groups who aren't ordinarily supported by the mainstream climate organizations, you know. So people who are fighting for migrant justice, and people who are also fighting for trans rights, people who are fighting for disability rights and things like that, which aren't the juicy things the big environmental organizations will go after, kind of will support. But like for us, it's important to support the entire movement. And so this came across my desk, and it was like it sparked because I'd already been in this place of wanting to have this. It sparked kind of lots of interest for me, and at the moment, like I would say, right now we're in a place where it's like I've not finished my work on this, but it's at a place where there's events happening. There's 3 or 4 events happening on a daily basis. That's on the calendar. There's about just over 30 organizations there. But it does, like I'm based in Newcastle, so it's very Newcastle centric and stuff like that. So I'm keen to spread it out as much as I can, while also thinking about the next steps. Like my role within this organization has changed. I'm become a northern organizer, so I'm kind of interested in having a northwest one and maybe a Yorkshire one and stuff like that. But like going back to what Jay said, like once you've got it set up with the organizations, the next big thing is like, this thing exists. I've persuaded all these people to use it, but now how do I make sure that everyone out there knows that we've created this thing and we want you to go on it and see what's going on and stuff like that. So what's become part of my regular routine is I got, I think, 4,000 leaflets printed. It might have been more than that. I just have them with me. There's a few places that are regular places that make sure that there's leaflets chopped up and stuff like that, and just making sure those kinds of things are done, and also making sure that the partners have leaflets to share with their group members and things like that, and just carrying that on within my work and stuff like that. I think that's everything I've got.
Great, thank you very much for sharing. To everyone, a few people have mentioned that there's been trouble getting PlaceCal funded or working how to make a sustainable PlaceCal, given that it needs a certain degree of infrastructure. What is the cause of these obstacles? Why is this a service that's not being taken very seriously by local providers or funders? This is to anyone.
For me, I think after hearing everyone describe this too, I think the problem is relationships are kind of invisible. It's like the hospitals have this problem where they can do a whip round for an MRI scanner, but they can't just get syringes or gloves. I think we've got that problem a little bit. And I think it's also felt on the ground at the moment. I feel like we are at a time when, in general, community organizing is the most burnt out, the most low resourced that it's ever been that I remember. and people are really struggling to keep their own group going. And the idea of having the energy to also do a bit of energy to be in a network seems insurmountable. But it's giving me a little bit of existential dread, though, because I feel like actually working together is the only power we have that like corporations and tech products don't. That like actually one of the only ways we can start to prevent burnout and build community infrastructure is to work on relationship work. But it just never seems to be that high at the top of the list. And I think, yeah, so that's my feelings on it. I'll let other people share.
I can come in a little bit. I mean, I think what funders expect us to do is use social media, but like we have described, as has been described by everyone else, social media is not built for, it's just built for clicks. It's not built for us to share our information. That old Facebook did it, but since that, it's never really happened. And yeah, so it kind of becomes kind of difficult. That's.
I can share some thoughts about some attempts we've made to get funding. I mean, I've tried a few different avenues. Research, we tried some research funding, but then it's very difficult to demonstrate that it's an evidence-based intervention, for example, because it's just, it's ethereal and, it's not a shot in the, it's not a literal shot in the arm. So it's kind of tricky to justify it as a health intervention or or any of those things. So you end up trying to justify it in the context of a specific service or specific reason for having it when it joins everything together. And so the reason for having it is community, and community is a commodity. It's like it's a commodity that we should all pay for now, I suppose. It's one of those other things. So there's no money in connecting people up for free, which is why Facebook shut it down, right? We've been trying to make the case. We're trying to make the case through the kind of projects I'm talking about. I'm trying to make the case for the kind of on the ground work, and I suppose I'm hopeful at some point, and we have had some of these discussions, but they've not quite got off the ground, where people then realize, well, actually, we were doing that on the ground, and this does it much easier, and you've already set it up. But I think it's one of those ones where when we've been explaining it to people, a few people have been able to get the idea, but then they can't see it because they're not using the trans dimension, for example, or they don't live in Hume and they're not over 65, so they actually can't see the benefits for themselves or their service directly. But then there's an example we've tried with the libraries. It's one of my favorite examples, but I'm not sure how much we want to talk about it. But originally we went to the library, for example, because it hosted loads of events for older people, at a history club and things like that. And you could book their room for the event, and they would write it in their ledger so that they had an appointment, but they wouldn't share the appointments on the ledger because they were only allowed to share appointments through the Manchester City Council website. They're only able to advertise events through the formal process of the City Council, which had several check-in procedures about content and things like that. So there's these kind of silos, I think, are one of the biggest problems we've got to try and get the funding. So that's why the most recent attempts have been around kind of crowdsourcing and subscription and actually trying to work on the community side of it and say, well, actually, is there a community of people that benefit from this kind of thing? And here in Rakesh's account, I think that's probably where we're going. But we shifted at a certain point from the place because we couldn't get this commitment to place information. And we then, I think the great learning from the Trans Dimension project was that we realized that there was a very different set of requirements for communities of interest. And I think what's great about the PlaceCal now that Kim and the team developed is that it can work with both, and so it has genuinely become a kind of Wikipedia. Whereas I think the first instance wasn't a Wikipedia because it would only serve a place, a community of place. And now it can be both, and they can intersect, and you can do those things. So I think one of the reasons we didn't succeed was because it wasn't actually that useful. Beyond, there were a few use cases early on, but now we know that it can be useful. Really useful, I think.
I think a lot of the issue's been this one of scale, right? Because because there's a very tried and trusted way of getting tech stuff started that's called venture capital, and the idea is you basically take on investment to pay a team, and the idea is you sell the whole company after 3 to 5 years after taking on a few million in investment, and you sell the company to a big 5 tech company. That's kind of the dream arc, and it's just not what we ever wanted to do from the start. We just wanted to do it as a non-profit thing. But then what we found was a lot of the community funds don't understand the technology, and the technology funds definitely don't understand the community side. So we're kind of in this really unique situation. And yeah, I think like Stefan said, the key thing too that we realized maybe a bit too late on, this is what we've been reflecting on recently, is how much of PlaceCal was baked in that original age-friendly neighborhoods DNA of assuming that there was a will for people to set up these partnerships of local groups and get them working together and get them to address the sort of 100 small things they're all facing as a group instead of one at a time. So and my response to this is I've started writing up some of the methodology behind this, which is the community technology partnership approach. But effectively nowadays, we're very often in this position where any context we go into, there's been, 5 attempts to make a community calendar, and they've all failed because they've all taken the same basic shape of we're going to set up another bloody WordPress thing. You have to log up and everyone has to log all their events in. And they all fall over, and then we're coming along saying, no, we definitely have fixed it this time, trust me. And honestly, it's a social intervention with a technical part. It's quite complex. You have to understand what we're talking about to engage with it, and most of the time the people who are holding the purse strings, they're not really interested in that. They just want to buy Microsoft Copilot and have that fix everything for them. And we've never found how to be in that room, I think, is part of our problem, because I don't know why. I've
even flirted with a venture capitalist to try and get some money, and
Me too.
So you can see how committed we've been to try and move it on.
I don't know though, Kim. I feel like I'd like to sort of emphasize opportunity and optimism a little bit as well, because I think there are big conversations around systems change at the moment. And actually, if we deliver a service and we just want to bring 15 young people together to improve their mental health, people don't necessarily want to fund that anymore. They want to fund what is the root cause of the problem for young trans people at the moment, and how are we going to kind of solve those bigger problems. So I think there are some. There's not. I mean, we're totally in the trust and foundation space. So I think we've never had local authority money. We're you're never going to get local money if you're a trans organization, because there's one trans person in every 100. So, and LGBT youth services went out in 2008. That was, those days are gone. So, so I think for me, philanthropic money and, trust and foundations for people who've been giving, City Bridge, Esme Fair, but, all of these big trusts that do want to give, they are interested in those bigger conversations around systems change and solving sort of bigger problems around connectivity in a complex world. So I don't know. I just want to challenge you a little bit. I think we just need to find the right, it's find the right couple of people really who support it and have got that. I mean, it is a bit like wealthy pots of money giving. I don't think you're going to get into a subscription model. I don't think people are going to pay for their community news. I mean, possibly if it was big enough, but it's a bit like, it's made me think about Spotify. Like, everyone just got free accounts, didn't they, for about 3 years, and then when it was big enough, everyone had to pay. So it needs to have a critical mass moment, I suppose, for people to value the community news.
I think that's exactly it. There's definitely a future here that isn't funding forever. So we have actually had a couple people start using it recently who are paying as a monthly sub. So there's this Black British History network across the country who've managed to find,
interesting,
some money from like they're giving us like 20 quid a month or something. There's a Pride of Place Leeds, which is a really rad new queer co-housing thing. I've just started using it, and that's similar. It's just like, and it's really good for us to have a little bit of trading income because thanks to some of the very generous people who've like donated to us since we've shifted to this model. I think our overheads, I'm not, touch wood, I think we're going to at least cover our overheads this year, so we're not in this position of it being, I think, completely boom to bust. I think anyone who's ever had grant funding knows it's when you have it, it's great. When you don't have it, it sucks. But actually, it can be really hard to transition off that onto another form of sustainable income.
Agree.
And I think that's the point we're at right now. So, we do have other funding bits in mind. I think like Jambud says, like social isolation and loneliness, part of the problem is we're almost swamped with places that could fund it, but no one tends to specifically care enough about this one issue to fund us. So, we've spoken to like aging charities, we've spoken to social isolation and loneliness, we've spoken to councils. I think a lot of them, once we build that critical mass, I think will buy in. And they'll be forced to buy in because it would be mad to use anything else. But the phase we're in right now is like we've proven the concept. The software's, it's a little bit janky around the edges, but it works really well for a lot of people. And we've got this gap now before it becomes a little bit more financially sustainable where we're getting in, if we get like we're on 2 now. If we get to even 20, maybe we can start thinking about having, a regular monthly drop in or, a paid coordinator who's always going out, this kind of role. Then if we get to, 200, maybe all of a sudden we've got someone working on it a couple of days a week, but it's just getting through this period we're at the moment, I think.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the critical mass idea and, the fax machine problem. There's no, you got to have enough people connected for it to make sense. But I think one of the things that I'm not sure that we know the answer to is that we move from kind of trying to do the community development ourselves and not to try and create the canonical source that we did in the first project. But then we realized that actually the people that we were trying to connect with weren't necessarily the single groups or, so the subscription model isn't for people to get their news. It's not for the end user. It's for people like yourself, Jay, you were creating a network
to advertise your wares
for other reason, and then you're trying to bring sight to that, and I think moving to what I don't know if we still call them the same thing, to kind of curators of calendars and targeting them, because the problem, one of the sales problems we had originally was that in the demo we did the community development work and the tech together. But whenever we were going to sell it to an organization, the only way it would work financially is if it was embedded in their community development work. So if you think about the NHS going out and doing their kind of asset-based mapping in the neighborhood, they had to do that because they'd already employed someone to do that, but they already had literally an Excel spreadsheet that they were filling out or something like that. And we were trying to convince them to go, use this software, but then you'd need to do a bit of training, and then you'd have to go to everybody and get them on the calendar.
But we promise it'll be easier after that, right?
But once you're up, and
then also as it's been progressive, it was also, and Kim might sometimes say to me, I'm not sure the software's going to work either. We haven't patched the beta, So there was all this incremental thing. So finding that, it seems like what the curator might be is kind of different depending on which organization or institution we're kind of working with as well. So we were looking at, say, something like GM Moving, which is about leisure facilities, and the pitch is, they can't get people to attend exercise classes, and we were trying to work with them, and so we would have had to train all of the leisure centres to be on PlaceCal. But actually, I think the last time I spoke with Kim about it, we're talking about it as an aggregator.
Yeah,
and I think this might be a real different way of thinking about it, even though maybe it sounds a bit obvious to some people. But
I think the fact we're going across department always counts against us. A lot of the time we'll start suggesting it, people are on board, and then they realize this means we have to deal with IT. So like, we can't commission a new IT thing without first running it past our existing IT people. And it feels a bit like, what's the quote about, what's the maxim about, it's very hard to teach people things that their job requires on them not understanding, right? I think we're in that position quite a lot. I just say Red Coyote asked in chat, have you tried pitching to unions? And yeah, so there's a lot of these things now where like I found a place I think it could be really useful. I found someone to work with. I've sent a couple emails. People seem excited, and then I just can't get a meeting together. And I think like, something else we've learned as part of this, again, being a scrappy activist, is that at some point you're just doing sales and there's no getting away from it. It's a community project. It's not for profit, but you're trying to sell a thing. And I think especially if I have things like housing unions, everyone's always got a priority that's more important than this. It's like, yeah, we all want to sort of get off Spotify or like whatever right now. But when do you find the time for that? It's really hard to prioritize, I think.
Yeah, I just recently finally signed up to Uber and YouTube Music, so I've capitulated completely. Sorry.
They get everyone in the end. Is there anything from the PlaceCal story or thoughts about the future of PlaceCal that people at this juncture think have been left out and need to be put on the record? Or do we think we've captured it?
I feel like we're missing a bit of the positivity. I think I have this habit of I talk about the problems because that's what I'm dealing with. But actually, like, there's definitely a level where it's been pretty successful. And I think it's sometimes hard to, again, especially when you're autistic, it's like, if everything's not going perfectly, it's easy to think of it as a failure. And like, it could have gone better. It could have gone a lot worse. And actually, at time of writing, we've got, let me have a look. We've got 400 plus groups using it. 420 groups listed on it. We've got a load of sites up. People are interested. We've had a couple sales this year. And I think underlying it all, it's just the thing we're really selling here. And this is something I've talked to you about, Sean, that I think I'd like to do another stream on, is just, if we're going to get off the corporate platforms, the thing we're lacking is a concrete way to actually do that, right? Because individually, it's insane. You can't just leave Instagram if you want to talk to, have friends, or Facebook, depending on what age bracket you're in. It's really tough. So I think like what we're developing here is an approach where a bunch of people can get together, say in your case, it might be comedians, right? And go, what shared problems are we all facing? Could we build something together that fixes all of it? And then own those tools collectively as a sort of not-for-profit or a social enterprise or something like that. And then, yeah, maybe in, like, honestly, we talked about no adverts, but a real low-hanging fruit for PlaceCal, if we had the network effect, would just be like local classified adverts again. Because where do you find them now? Just like people being able to advertise, I'm a plumber in Hume. It's like, it's so complicated now to find that information. And I think part of the way PlaceCal works is it actually encourages people to show the most zoomed in they are, because that's more useful. Knowing someone's in Hume is a lot more useful than knowing they're in Manchester. Because if I'm looking at Manchester results, I can see Hume's there. But if I'm looking at Hume, I don't want all the Manchester results. It's like, but people are used to thinking of everything they do in these gigantic terms. Like, I think especially in the trans world, Jay will know this. It's like, oh, there's 3 of us, so let's set up a group representing the entire Northwest. It's like, have you even left like the center of that area? Probably not.
Well, from my narrow perspective, which is that I've spent a lot of time bouncing around different sectors of arts and performance, DIY, comedy, music, etc., there is a massive understanding amongst promoters and people who want to put on events and get people to come to the events that the game's stacked against them as well. Disseminating simple information for local music, local comedy, local arts is extremely expensive and extremely narrow. It's Facebook adverts, or it's like private billboards. It's like, it's harder than ever. And these people are networking, but they're doing it on like these Facebook groups that are in themselves limited. Because how do you have like a constant ongoing conversation unless I've seen people try to put every promoter in Yorkshire in a WhatsApp group, and that's not the right method either. Or they require such an amount of upkeep that no one's really going to do. There's no convenience and there's no obvious forum for this. But from my perspective, when I first heard about PlaceCal years ago, I think I'm extremely enthusiastic about this as a solution to all the problems of small-scale promoters as well, because they all feel like the little guy in their individual city, and they will in a heartbeat bandy together to be like, let's just make a PlaceCal for all of the music, all of the comedy, all of the theatre that's going on in the small function rooms, the community centres, the 100-seater theatres. They'll bandy together in a heartbeat because they're not the big players. They've only worked together. They only have any success because they have managed to build a network in the first place, but it's on a shoestring because they're working through these fragmented social media sites. One person starts getting more success on Instagram, so they're not putting things on Facebook, and then suddenly a network link in the chain breaks because they're not in the same place and then can't DM each other so easily. So I completely understand the issue of getting this funded and getting this sustainable, but I think once the ball's rolling and this is something that people have examples of working in the wild, I can just think of so many interest groups that would be falling over themselves to have one of their own. I appreciate this is just optimistic enthusiasm from someone who's never been boots on the ground, but I think it's great.
Your boots on the ground, this is what I mean, Sean, and I think it's part of this thing of just, this is what community organizing is, but because of the way neoliberal capitalism works, you're made to think it's not. Like, you're an active community organizer who puts on loads of gigs and invites people and curates this little scene. And like, it, you know, if probably if you were working for a housing association, they would just be like all over themselves about the social impact you've created, and you go in their social impact report as, I mean, you know what I mean, Stefan?
Yeah. I think there is, I don't know if it's because the crisis has got so bad, because I do tend to look on the dark side, and it's not because I'm autistic. But I think the crisis has got so bad that I think people are moving towards more the need for community connection and organising, certainly in the health service and the prevention, ideas of prevention and things. So I think there might be a moment, I think there might be a window where the kind of big institutions, city councils and maybe combined authorities are opening up to these ideas. We've had some conversations, so there is still some hope around that. But this conversation has been really useful, I think, to try and help us kind of figure out what the arguments are, what the differences are for them. And I think this aggregator idea is probably the thing that we were missing, because actually the pitch to GM, GM or Manchester City Council, for example, is, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was a place where you could find out what's on at the library and the leisure centre and the comedy clubs and the music venues? Because I mean, I just wanted to go to the theatre last month. I couldn't find out what was on. I couldn't even find a list of all the theatres in Manchester, just like go through them one by one manually. The idea that you might aggregate what's on at the theatre to benefit Manchester City, for example, and the residents is ridiculous. The idea that it's got so difficult to do that. So I think that aggregating function is might be a really clear pitch to people that they might understand. And then all you need to, then you do need someone to go around and sign people up. Yeah. But the people you're signing up maybe are the music venues or the theatres even, and they know damn well how to send out an iCal feed and write a little bit of blurb about themselves, right? So, I think that might be the pitch. But then, obviously, all of this has been predicated on the fact that we can maintain PlaceCal, so that we can get enough money in to keep it going and keep it served, so that it doesn't lose its precious critical mass. And then at the same time, Kim or someone has to go and sell it to them. So, so it's the perennial chicken and egg of community organising, I suppose.
It's the sales that's the hard bit. It really is, because
Well, we're getting there. We're still in the game, still in the fight. And there's, it's really, really heartening to hear Trans Dimension story and Tipping Point story and see how it is really working on the ground. So I really appreciate hearing directly from both of you about it as well, because you know. And for my part, I mean, I've stuck in there, but my work has mainly been elsewhere. So I just want to say thanks to Kim on the live stream for keeping it going and really pushing it on for so long now. Yeah.
Agree.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, brilliant work.
Public adoration. This is why I started this, really.
Nice.
Does anyone in the chat have any questions? We've had a few.
I think we've addressed the ones we've received so
Great.
far.
I think maybe another thought I'd add to that I think we've not really made the case for anyway. This is it. It's too sprawling now. There's too many cases we could make. But I think, you know, being political used to involve necessarily being in a physical space, right? You just had to go somewhere and do it. And then if you go to a community center, you just end up getting involved. You do a cafe shift, you put on a film night. You never have to like think about the politics. But I think especially post-COVID, it feels like politics now it's a bit more just these like campaigning actions they get called, right? It's like sending a letter to your MP or signing a petition or like sharing something on Instagram. And that's fine, but I think it just makes everyone miserable and burnt out. And it never seems to really add up to anything. It's a bit zero sum. So I think really what we're proposing with this community technology approach and what PlaceCal is a tool for is to give people a thing that says the world out there is really depressing. Maybe we could just all organize our own little part of it and we can give you the support and tools and training to do that. And then that is like the what it means to be political for you. You're doing something that brings you joy on the ground, face to face, you know? I think that's the sense I really want to get across.
I think that's
to end on a positive note, Sean.
I was going to say, I think that's a great note to end on. I hope the project goes from strength to strength. I know it's been a warm evening, so thank you so much for everyone coming and talking through all your experiences. Thank you for assembling your thoughts. And
thank you, chatters, for coming too. We weren't sure if anyone would come. I really appreciate it. This is very experimental.
I can't read it, but looks great.
Yeah, thank you to everyone in the chat who's come out to watch this. I know it's been very warm, so we are extra grateful for your time and energy. Great. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you especially to our guests, Dr. Jay Stewart, Professor Stefan White, Dr. Kim Foale, and Rakesh Prashara. Thank you for giving up your evening and for all the work you've done setting up and maintaining PlaceCals.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. If you've enjoyed the stream, please follow the Geeks for Social Change Twitch account. Kim may also pass in a link to the Discord. For now, I will let you get on with being too warm and have a good weekend, one and all.
Thanks.
Goodbye from us.
Bye.